is to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
On Friday, January 19th, the commencement order was signed to establish the agency, according to Minister of Public Telecommunications, Cathy Hughes. This is the first of two phases in the implementation of the Telecommunications Act 2016.
The objective of establishing the agency now is to give time to put in place certain administrative arrangements that are necessary for the agency to function effectively when the entire act is brought into force.
The agency will be responsible for several administrative and organizational activities. These include staffing, finalization of licensing procedures in preparation for liberalization, and issuance of new licenses to telecommunication entities. An update was also given on the 5-year ICT Access and E-Services for Hinterland Poor and Remote Communities project, which seeks to bridge the gap between coast and hinterland. The US $17 million project is being funded by the Guyana Red Plus Investment Fund.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another program that is interesting and is going to have engagement from across Guyana. Tonight, we want to look at the telecommunications sector. We want to look at a number of other aspects of Guyanese life living. And also tonight, if I may start by saying, firstly, credit to Globespan 24x7 team, to Nohar Singh, and all the people who are working hard to bring everything up to par for us. To our viewers out there, telecommunication is an important aspect of a nation's development. It is a tool for business, and in the age of interconnected consumer and manufacturer, it is integral. Communications also form the means for modern-day commerce, health advancement, and just about everything else. Guyana's utility frontier has been dominated by monopolies operating in a manner as to hold the country's development to its own determinable pace or lack thereof. So the development of Guyana is at the mercy of the investors, the telephone company, the power company, etc. And for more than a decade, there has been talk of liberalization of the telecom sector that should allow other operators to enter into a level playing field. We know that the liberalization legislation was passed some time ago, assented into law, but not yet enforced. We also know that Guyana continues to be dominated by one landline operator and two mobile operators. We also know that the landline controls virtually all internet access, the landline operator, and resells this to other operators. And I think as noted recently by one of the CARICOM groups, in 2013, GT&T would have controlled internet access within the country. However, for over a decade, successive governments have been in negotiations with the telephone companies to move the liberalization process forward. And while the last 10, 15 years have passed, GT&T would have renewed its option to extend its exclusive license. And in that time, too, Digicel would have filed a court action against that license. What we also know from matters in SEC filing of GT&T's parent company, that the company recognizes that there may be potential sums due to Guyana for certain transactions. One can see references to spectrum fees, outstanding taxes, for example. And on the local front, we have places that literally cries and begs for good standard of service. The Essequibo Coast cries for a good standard of service. Mind you, the UN has opined that internet access is a human right, and therefore, such right is being denied to hundreds of Guyanese. I recently came from Kingsville, Kanji, where the internet access is almost impossible at times, and people feel that their service is throttled so as to push them to take a more expensive service without the choice of a competition. To get to the task at hand, in April 2019, like its predecessor, the government of Guyana announced that there are other interested parties awaiting to provide communication service to Guyana. Minister of Telecommunications, Minister Cathy Hughes, said that companies from Suriname, US, Brazil were eagerly awaiting their entry into the local market. And even Cable and Wireless seems willing to return to Guyana, given the fiasco of the 1970s nationalization program. And apparently there is also interest in another undersea cable. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a distinct honor tonight to have with us the Minister of Telecoms, Minister Cathy Hughes. Minister, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Yog. It's a joy to be here tonight.
Wonderful. And if I may start, Minister, by asking you, that we want tonight we want viewers to have a look at the telecommunications sector, in particular the liberalization process. I would want to start the ball rolling by asking you for your opening comments with relation to the liberalization program, knowing that the amendment bill was passed in 2016. So your comments on the current status.
Thank you, Yog. My comments on the current status. You're absolutely right. I know in your introduction you highlighted the fact that we passed an important legislation in 2016 that really paved the way for us to be able to start a process of liberalization, which of course means that we're opening up the sector to competition and to more participants. I'll be the first to admit that it was my hope that this process would have been completed a while ago. What I would like to say in terms of the current status, you may have known that a couple of months ago we actually signed a non-binding MOU with ATN and GT&T. ATNI, of course, is the parent company of GTT. And one of the things that that I came to recognize, which I think really explains the difficulties in finalizing a deal in a short space of time, is that this negotiation is really a multi-sectorial negotiation. What I mean by that is that it doesn't involve just the Ministry of Public Telecommunications. For clarity, the foundation was this new legislation, but for us, our goal was ensuring that Guyana gets a good deal in this negotiation. And as you know, we are going to end a monopoly that in fact, as you mentioned, was renewed. So there's existing time on, remaining time on the contract, the current contract. The previous government in 2010, or I should say GT&T in 2010, renewed their license. And of course, there is many more years on that license. So the challenge is in coming up with a fair agreement. We have to negotiate not only with GT&T, but to ensure that the aspects that deal with taxes, GRA, which is an independent agency, also the Public Utilities Commission that had cases and also spectrum issues, the National Frequency Management Unit, even the Attorney General's chambers that had
current legislation, current cases in the courts, and of course other ministries like the Ministry of Public Infrastructure. Issues related to, for example, poll sharing, the use of public spaces. So what I'm trying to do is to explain that the process has been a very wide and all-encompassing one that involved many, many sectors. And I'm happy to say, though, that I think we are seeing the final stages of this process. So I know what the demand is, and we continue to push this forward. I'm excited. I am very strong on saying that the majority and the largest amount of progress has been made since 2016, when the Ministry of Public Telecommunications was established. You, as a former head of GT&T, would know and would remember how long ago we'd started this process. So I'm excited that this government is pushing it forward.
Correct. Thank you, Minister. And it is indeed interesting to hear you say that you believe that the light, the end of the tunnel, the light is closer than it would have been. I think a lot of people are very concerned that the length of time that is passing by is virtually throttling innovation and throttling a lot of work that could have been done and interconnectivity that could have been done. However, let me also ask you this, Minister, with regards to the current negotiations you're on. It's interesting, last week I had the head of the PUC, and of course I did not put Ms. Britton on the spot by asking this, but of course I could ask you. The negotiations you're having with the telephone company is ongoing, notwithstanding the same matter being in front of the courts as a challenge from Digicel, I think. Digicel has challenged the status of the telephone company. And I know that Pat Dayal from the Consumers Association has publicly published an opinion on the contract. But I guess that's beside the point, because you would have had enough advisors telling you whether the contract has been voided or not.
The government of Guyana respects all international contracts and all contracts. And therefore, we are starting off from the perspective that a contract is in place. And our entire process has been one of, I think, trying to get to mutual agreement. It has taken this long, as I mentioned, because we're not prepared to rush through anything. The GRA is an independent agency. Part of the challenge when you talk about, the delays, we are actually having to do research in terms of the GRA. They are going back to possible taxes that were owed to the government of Guyana since the inception of the contract in 1999. So the challenge for me is that there are a lot of issues, especially requests for spectrum management, looking at, we actually had to get two consultancies that looked at what our pricing policy would be going forward. Because remember, at the end of this negotiation period, the telecommunications agency comes into being in full force.
Correct.
So it's not only negotiating the end of the contract, but ensuring that we have created an agency that has the requisite regulations to support the legislation, that we have operating procedures, that we are looking at how best to move this sector forward. So for me, I would say that if in the past more of these issues had been dealt with, we would not have had to go back literally on more than 20 years of a contract, and we go back and have the agencies look at issues, areas of contention, and try to settle all those as we come up with an agreeable contract. So,
but Minister, if I may interject, I think there are two dimensions to this. One is that the parent company, if you look at the SEC filings, one would see from the SEC filings the recognizable risks that the company would be accruing for. And I think that alone should give one light as to where we go. But my main concern here, and viewers' main concern, would be if we don't draw a line, put a date down by when we hope this process to be finished, will it ever be done? I mean, I think the license is going to run out sometime in 2030, which is around the corner almost.
But yo, you are now saying to me to draw a line when there are independent agencies like the GRA that I have no control over, that have an important position that they need to negotiate with the company external to these negotiations. So it's almost as if those issues, the tax issues, only GRA could settle. The issues with PUC, the issues with Spectrum, all of those have to be settled. And unfortunately, as an independent agency, you know that if I took it upon myself to decide the position that should be the decision of the GRA, you and the public in Ghana would be the first to say, where Minister Hughes thinks she's going speaking for the GRA. But I'd like to be positive, and I'd like to say that we have had international consultants that looked at the value of this monopoly. We've looked at the value of the spectrum. We have very carefully designed legislation and implemented parts of it, as you know, which looks to the future of the industry. The previous legislation never looked at the internet. And that's part of the challenge that we also have as a country. Technology, you know, is moving at such a rapid rate. Here we are needing to ensure that we create an environment that measures up to the new technologies that are coming in the future. I am very, very confident that in a matter of few months, we will be where we need to be. And in the meantime, I'd love to tell you about some of the exciting things that we have been doing in the ministry that already is preparing an environment. You quite rightly mentioned our work with and discussions with several companies that are interested in coming in and investing in the market. We've been doing a lot of training. My ministry has a very innovative industry and innovation unit where we're creating, I think, the next generation of digital citizens. We've been working towards providing more internet access, especially in hinterland, poor and remote communities. And so I don't like to look at it only from the negative, but to look at all the other things that we've done in a matter of 3 short years that were not done before.
Yeah, but if I may take you back to one point, Minister, I don't disagree with you that there are many agencies involved. But having been in executive management myself, as you are, I think unless and until you have one agency or one set of persons that runs this exercise, that all other agencies are going to come under, we'll never get there. Because I think what's been happening in viewers' minds, let's take the people from Ezequibo, or let's take some incoming businesses in Guyana. Two dimensions they're looking at. One is that who's looking out for their best interests in terms of the standards of service in unregulated areas, because the PUC is not regulating certain areas. And the other is that if you are proceeding as minister with certain dimensions of the sector itself, aren't you, by using the current status quo to advance your own, not your personal, but to advance the agenda of telecoms in your ministry's vision, aren't you therefore creating a niche for the same monopoly standard to continue?
Absolutely not. I strongly disagree with that. The whole gist of the legislation, if you've seen it, allows for the several entities, new entities to come into the market. And therefore, in our thrust, we are looking not only, for example, we recognize that there probably is space for another mobile provider in the market. We're also looking at the fact that there's space for one other subsea cable, which of course is necessary to ensure that we have resilience and we have backup. We are also ensuring that in the model and vision, that in regional areas, in our regions, in smaller communities, that we would be able to develop improved access to some of our hinterland areas. We had a disaster with a cable in the previous administration that was never completed and could not be used. And we want to make sure that we are able to rectify the possibility for connectivity that goes from Tamari all the way down south. That allows a small operator, let's say in Anai, to be able to develop his own model of being an ISP, of providing some kind of telecommunication service to the South Rupununi area. So the possibilities for business, the possibilities for smaller entrepreneurs to come into the market are real. The current legislation actually has, as you will know, provision for a fund, a special connectivity and accessibility fund that smaller operators would be able to access. Because we recognize that in areas where, for example, there are only 500 people, 1,000 residents, that a big operator may not want to go into those areas. And that actually is the challenge we have with our current environment. In areas where there's high levels of population, you will have fairly okay service. Yeah. Exactly. But my government and I am interested in what is it that we're providing to those areas where, for example, there isn't even a mobile cell phone service. I went to Oriella, for example, a couple of months ago, and we established internet access. And that's why we're using the whole foundation of carrying internet and broadband access as a way of bridging the gap whilst we wait on the ending of this monopoly. And of course, we are very, very targeted in that we are providing service to government agencies, government ministries, to schools. I'd like to say that we've connected free internet access to over 170 schools. We've done close to 120 government ministries. We have created 174 what we call ICT hubs. We're in a community, not only in Georgetown, in Berbice, in Essequibo, and several areas in our hinterland region 1, 7, 8, and 9. And these are areas that didn't have internet unless, for example, a community was able to buy internet services. And quite often, sometimes, it would be as high as $30,000 a month. So to these hospitals, to the police stations, to the regional offices, to the schools in those areas, we have provided internet access. So we're trying to bridge.
Those are run by the government or owned by the government.
Those are areas where the government, because of its commitment to connect people to the internet, knowing full well that broadband access enhances, for example, the opportunity for education. I mentioned Oriella. With a smart TV and our smart classroom program, we're able, through the provision of internet, to ensure that if someone is in Oriella and wants to do, let's say, biology at a prearranged time, the students in Oriella can dial in to the same class that's taking place at Queen's College, because we've put some smart classrooms in strategic areas. The same principle operates when you look at what we want to do in the area for health. For the first time, we were able 2 weeks ago to operationalize our tower in Lethem. That automatically was able to provide free internet through the cable that we ran to the Lethem Hospital. We did a demo, and the folks at the Lethem Hospital are now able to communicate directly with the Georgetown Public Hospital and to any other hospital. In the test, we connected them to a hospital in New Amsterdam.
So, Mr. Would you be able to say, sorry to cut in there, would you be able to say what technology, if it's at your fingertips, you would have been using and what provider? Yeah.
Sure. So let me tell you, we've done it in two ways. We have made a commitment that in these areas,
I think we may have lost Minister there a little bit. So in the meanwhile, we can continue our discussion because I've noticed that we have a number of persons sending in messages from.
Sorry about
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Hugh.
Yeah, we were talking about the technology.
That's right. In terms of the technology, we have developed relations, and as much as possible, if we have a private sector company that already has access to a particular area, we have actually at our own cost entered into contracts with those individuals.
Okay.
So just to name a few, we already have contracts to provide connectivity with GT&T, with Digicel, with IMON Computers, IMON, and other companies. Other areas, what we've done...
What I meant with technology, I meant if the overarching, so let's say when you connect the police stations or the hospitals, are you using Huawei technology? Are you using...
We have purchased a series of VSAT dishes, and we are using VSAT to then connect.
Okay.
Depending on the area, if it's along the coast, as you would know, we had an e-government network that the previous government actually built. But it was completed in 2013, 2014, but it was never operationalized. That has been a key asset for us.
And I think they had used the Huawei technology, right?
That's right. They had used Huawei. And so in 2015, we actually put that into operation. And that's the way through which we're able to do that. We actually have gone on with 2 different projects to expand that network.
Okay. The reason I asked you about the Huawei technology is, as you know, especially the North American countries have expressed great alarm with what they call the spy game that Huawei seemed to have been caught up in. So two things I would want to ask you there: whether the government shares that concern with regards to the security risks potentially posed by Huawei. And the second question is, has the Chinese company been found that bought the shares from the government of Guyana, the 20% shares?
Okay. Let me answer the first question. When it comes to Huawei yoke, I think anybody can do their research and see that there are no cases that have been brought against Huawei for spying. There's a lot of speculation, But if you look at it, none of those cases, nobody has actually, the biggest problem with Huawei is actually in the US market. And I would not proffer a reason. The US government has their own positions on Huawei. What I will say, though, is that there's no question that the Chinese are way ahead with technology in the telecommunications and ICT sector. As you know, there's a big push for 5G, and whether we like it or not, we have to accept. And most persons internationally will accept that the Chinese are ahead with 5G technology.
Correct.
And therefore, I would throw out that the scenario and the reasons for the US's dissatisfaction with Huawei are very, very complex. I will say, though, that there are several companies and countries that use Huawei technology. And I'm talking about developed countries.
Okay.
For Guyana, we have had the opportunity to do what we're able to do, which is moving us ahead at a rapid pace, because we at least started with, and we are building on the Huawei technology. Up to this point in time, we are putting things in place to look at the security aspects. We have a very comprehensive cybersecurity unit. And you and I know that there's several countries in the world that have been spying on all kinds of things.
Well, we want to come back to the security aspect. Yeah, we want to come back to the security aspect just now. But what about the Chinese buyer of that 20% shares? Has it been found?
No. Well, the buyer, this government, as you know, has tried to recover those funds. And there was a portion that remains outstanding. And the challenge was that to take legal action internationally was going to be a very, very, very high cost. And so the remaining...
have identified the buyer?
Yes, the buyer was identified. As you know, Minister Harman made some good progress on identifying the buyer. The government of Guyana has been in negotiations with the buyer, and there is a 5% that is still due to Guyana. The challenge for us is that, you would have to take them to court in an international court. And the challenge is, would you spend $5 million US prosecuting for the 5?
But isn't there a way you could go through the courts of Guyana to levy against any
all the assets of the company are external to Guyana.
Well, no, but they are receiving dividends, aren't they?
Well, what I want to say, I would say yes. And what I would say is, this administration is very interested in collecting what is due to Guyana. I regret the fact again that the transition and the payment of these shares were not done as part of the negotiations. As you know, this is something that precedes this administration.
But Minister,
I'd like to say...
Yeah, if I may, but the fact is that as of today, whether there are sums outstanding, because if I'm looking at a filing at the SEC that lists Hong Kong Gold and Telecom Company Limited, a Hong Kong company, as the 20% owner of GT&T.
Yes.
And so the fact that is known and filed at the SEC, therefore this company would be remitted funds out of Guyana.
And you're absolutely correct. And I didn't want to not answer your question, but I do want to say that this issue is engaging the attention of our lawyers, and we intend to get what is due to Guyana.
So, Minister, on that same note, another question for you. Now, I'm basically referring to documents filed at the SEC.
Yeah.
So I am, based on the document I have in front of me, dated March 2019. There is, for example, and why I'm asking, let me preface it with this. Why I'm asking you this question is, while negotiation may be going on for liberalization, whether there is any any watchdog over the operations of companies to ensure that assets are not being moved out, because this
Which company are you referring to? Sorry.
Telephone company. Yeah, but because you're negotiating for the end of contract. And so my question is there any system in place where you'll be watching over the company to ensure that its assets, territorial assets, for example, that would be used to negotiate a rate of return are not divested of in the process of negotiation? In other words, if negotiation started here and ends at a particular time in the future, in between, if any assets are divested of, should it not be your interest to know about it?
I think we're in these negotiations, we are looking at all of these areas.
Okay. And the other follow-up to that is that in the negotiation, would you be able to say at this stage when Guyanese can expect to see another operator on the scene, mobile operator?
No, I don't want to, Yog.
Okay.
Only because I wish I could. And
I wish you could.
I know. I am just as anxious.
Okay.
I'm just as anxious as you are. And
we're not going to use it as a campaign promise, you know. So
I am saying that I'm working assiduously. Let me tell you, Yo, there are two things I want to say. I want to say that we've gone out of our way to ensure we try to do this the right way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we didn't want to give Guyana the reputation of, especially now as we have this exciting oil and gas industry, and we have several international contracts. We don't want to be a pariah. We don't want to be the country that doesn't honor its contract and doesn't stick to the sanctity of a contract.
But Minister, if I may, I'm so sorry, and I'm not going to ask you to answer to this. This is just an opinion. There's a lot of talk out there about the quality of contracts we are signing. I mean, you mentioned the oil and gas, and it doesn't give us much confidence that the contracts being signed and that we're being held responsible to commit to are not necessarily good for Guyana.
But that's exactly why tonight we're talking about GT&T, ATN, and this contract.
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely why it is taking a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Because anybody comes to me and says, oh, you gave away this contract, I would be able to show 3 international consultancies that we did that clearly highlighted what we believe the value will be, what we believe would be the best spectrum pricing model, all the key areas, the frequencies, ensuring that we have frequencies for emergencies, for new operators. And so I really want to say that I know the urgency.
Mm-hmm.
I have gone to several communities in Essequibo, in Berbice, where there is no access to landlines. Where, for example, it means that a young person that wants to do, that's doing exams, doesn't have the comfort of internet straight to their home.
And not just access, the price too, right? The price has
exactly, because in cases like that, quite often they're struggling to download information for their SBAs on their phones. So, let me tell you, I have gone to
offer the Essequibo people any relief.
Well, that is why I have offered them release.
Okay.
I have offered them relief in the 174 ICT hubs where they can go to and they can sit in a safe space with anywhere from 10 to 15 computers. Their parents can sit outside on the benches, on the chairs, and everybody can use free internet access. So we're creating some hotspots. We're creating more public internet access points, and we're doing that as the bridge until we can finalize.
But you mentioned free internet access, but it's not really free, right? Because the taxpayers are paying for it.
The government of Guyana is paying for it.
Through
and yes, of course,
right?
The government taxes, that's what we do. We do taxes, clean our roads, collect our garbage, and do everything else. So obviously, but what I'm saying is that the lady that I met in Region 5 and Region 6, all those women that are there that bring their kids to the hubs, they don't have to go into their pocket and pay $10, $10,000 a month for internet service.
I want to flip the coin a little bit and talk about something else.
Sure.
Would you care to comment on the current status? You're a minister of government. As you know, everything is in the air. Everything has been part of the news cycle. There has been cases and court cases and court cases one after the other. And maybe half of Guyanese feel that there should be elections and half feel that you continue the way you are. Why I'm asking you this, Minister, the AFC years ago, I believe, it grabbed a lot of people's excitement and imagination. And I gather, I travel around this country a lot to many villages too. Last weekend gone, I was in Canefield, Kanji. And I gather out there that a lot of people feel flummoxed. They feel derailed. They feel betrayed. That this AFC that they saw as the beacon of good governance and all the promises has now succumbed into. So what's your what's your take on what's going on? And without being part of the coalition and all of that, let me hear from Cathy Hughes.
So certainly, I'm more than happy to speak to that. So the first thing I want to say, as you would know, is being in opposition and being in government is two totally different things. And I want to speak as Cathy Hughes, a person who has been with the AFC from day one. I want to start off by saying that there are several issues that we have to fix in this beautiful land of Guyana. As you know, I don't think that any one party can successfully move our country forward. And therefore, coalition politics is something that I am happy that we were able to at least establish in this administration. Now, let me tell you, just after we came into government, we had the Parliament of Guyana brought some MPs from the British Parliament, and they shared their challenges and experience about coalition politics. And this is the part that people are not able to remember or understand fully. In coalition politics, it's almost like your family, where you got a husband and a wife. And at the end of the day, the husband's perspective might be on a particular issue, might be in one direction, and the partner or the wife may have a different perspective. But in the interest of moving this family unit forward, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of exchange, but most importantly, there is compromise.
But an abusive relationship can break up, right?
I would be the first to say that the Alliance for Change quite often has been the party, I think, that has come to positions of compromise in the national interest. I do not believe that we've been walked over or walked upon. I think there's a lot of propaganda out there from day one that wanted to make sure that this government and the coalition did not work. So we've been working against that.
But propaganda aside.
Can I finish my point?
Sure.
So the challenge is that on several issues, we have been absolutely strong. One of them, for example, was on the parking meter. We totally disagreed with the positions of some of the other members that are part of the coalition. And we said that. But at the end of the day, a national position by the government of Guyana had to be taken. And we made our position clear, but again, in the name of the government, which is what coalition politics is about, there is the mantra of collective responsibility. And we would have put this country in chaos if every single time we disagreed, we said, you know what, we picking up our bat and ball and we leaving.
Yeah.
So it is not, I say all of that to say it is not an easy situation.
I think
And,
we would agree.
yeah,
It can't have been easy
and
because everybody has their own, modus operandi and ideology.
the other thing too that I like to say is that you're bringing, when we spoke with the British MPs, I
Mhm.
remember one of them saying to me that it was such a challenge in the David Cameron administration. There were times when they went almost close to blows, you
Right.
know?
Mhm.
And so I say that one of the problems I think we have is that we didn't really explain enough and temper people's expectations of the challenge.
But Minister, let me point this to you. This propaganda side, I have not been involved in politics, at least up to now. I
Uh-huh.
certainly am thinking probably to get myself involved. But um, the truth is that from a member of the public perspective, I've been in Guyana since all the time. I'm here. And the truth is that you said that, okay, sometimes, you have to realize you're in a partnership and you have to, one party or the other has to make sacrifice. Go back to your 2014, 2015 approach, your 2013, 2014. There are many persons, there were cyber bullies, there were many persons who held the cudgel of morality. And you approached the election saying wrong is wrong. Wrong cannot be right. Corruption is wrong. This is wrong. That is wrong. I'm not happy to hear you say that you have to give in to certain things.
No,
Wrong cannot be right.
no, no. I'm not saying that we have to give in to things. You're putting words in my mouth and
Sorry.
you're
I would never
suggesting
do
that
that.
I'm saying that we're going to go down the road with everything. And I said that we've been extremely strident on quite a few things. So you mentioned the word corruption. And
Mhm.
this is something that I really want to say. There is a discussion that we need to have in Guyana on
Yes.
several important issues, which actually impact on where we are today. And it's funny, but whether we like it or not, the no confidence motion has opened the schisms in Guyanese society. And unfortunately, quite often we don't want to face it head on. So
Mhm.
we have issues with race. We
Yes.
have serious issues with race. And depending on who you speak to in Guyana today, you will get a totally different perspective of what today's environment. If
Correct.
you speak to someone living in Mocha, they will tell you that on Mocha Road, where several women were raped 15 and 20 years ago, Mocha Road only got lights on that main carriageway in 2016, right?
Okay.
Places like Sophia
But
will
but
tell you, hold on,
but that
places like Sophia,
that race issue is very interesting, and and I want to mention to you this, that it is an unfortunate fact.
but
There
you're
are
not letting me
in
finish my point.
Go ahead.
So what I'm saying is, as I talk about maybe using Mocha as an example, but there are other communities that will feel and interpret a scenario exactly the same way. So
Hmm.
I'm going to be bold and go mention the sugar industry.
Yeah.
If everybody's honest, we will know that that sugar industry was in collapse. We know that. We know that we spent 200 million on that Skeldon plant that absolutely did not work.
Correct.
We know in opposition, we complained about the board at Gaisuko.
But in opposition, you said you would do
Individual.
certain things you haven't done.
Exactly. We have done that.
No,
We said that we would restructure. We
you
would
didn't say you would
restructure.
close.
We said we would restructure, and guess what? Part of that restructuring process meant that we had to close the estates that were not working.
But
Yo,
Minister, how you gonna put 7,000 people out of
hold
the
on,
job and not
hold on.
plan for them?
How are we going to put $1 billion a month? We
Hmm.
put $32 billion into that sector. $32 billion that we have nothing to show for.
Okay.
And that's why there are stories, unfortunately, that the propaganda does not tell. So
No,
I'll give
let's not get into the propaganda, but that 32 billion that you were saying that you were pouring into Gaisuku,
yes.
At the end of the day, was enough effort spent on assessing why is it taking so much, and two, if you were sending 5,000 or 7,000 workers off the job, what would the government have planned for them to do thereafter?
But
Because
again,
the drain on the economy of 7,000 unemployed is more than the 32 billion.
Yes, but this is where, and I blame Gaisuku for not putting out enough information on all that has happened. Because believe it or not, I know of people that got their severance. There was a big scream and shouting that we weren't going to pay the severance. We paid the severance. We said we were going to pay some in January and we're going to pay the rest in December. We did that. We were true to our word. And there's several persons that got their severance and went into business. There's several women that were trained in other areas. There's several things, but we don't look at those things. Now, I want to go back to, you mentioned corruption. And one of the things I want to say, in addition to racism, we need to have a national conversation on corruption. Because corruption is not only in a government. Corruption is on every street corner.
But you know, they say that the rot starts from the top.
I know. And we have been extremely strong on corruption.
Minister,
there are people in this administration that were sent home. That never happened before.
But
based on that,
Minister, let me ask you a question. Have you filed all your necessaries to the Integrity Commission?
I have filed, and it was so funny because I filed my returns, and when I filed my returns the last in 2018, the leader of the opposition was very strong on the fact that he hadn't filed his.
Right.
And I know that President Granger said up front that he was engaging the Integrity Commission. What is sad, though, in my case, and I've said this publicly, is that since 2011, when I first went into Parliament, I have a series of letters that I wrote to the Integrity Commission asking them to address some issues and concerns. I even wrote the
But you answered my question. You answered my question. You have filed your returns. Can you, as a senior senior partner in the AFC partnership of the coalition, can you say, or would you be able to say, what percentage of your comrades or your associates would have done the same?
I would only be willing to. I could only speak for myself. I think
but isn't that something the AFC should stand up for?
As far as I am aware, the members of the AFC have been committed to filing their returns. But you know what you forget is that the returns, it's not only the politicians. And how do you explain? Have you asked Mr. Jagdeo why he didn't file his return?
Well, when I bring him on the program, I will ask him.
I think you should.
I think you should.
Should ask him, as you should ask him, why they would have spent close to 30 million, more than 5 billion Guyana dollars, millions of US dollars on cable that would have enhanced our telecommunication services.
Certainly. When I have him, I have a list of questions.
And what you also need to say to him, what you also need to ask him is, why didn't they lock up somebody for all that money?
But you didn't too.
We are, that is one of the things, because I tell you what, I would like to do.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I tell you what, Minister, a couple of things, two more questions I have for you just now. But
Yeah.
one other thing is that every time we engage, not necessarily with you, but people with government, they always refer to, well, the PPP used to do this or the former government used to do this. But I am not evaluating you
Yeah.
and your performance based on what the PPP did. I'm evaluating you based on your own stance.
And no, all I'm saying is that if you ask me a personal question in terms of the status of my in my returns to the Integrity Commission, I'm more than happy to ask. But I'm only saying to you, I can't speak for anybody else, you know. But I do want to. You raised the question about elections.
Well, yes, but I want to ask you this. You mentioned earlier that coalition politics is maybe one of the things that is good for Guyana because it brings a lot of people together. Would you be willing to throw your hand up and say you are going to take you're going to make the call to the PPP to join in forming a coalition or a front government?
Well, I personally do not really know. And that's why I started by saying these are the discussions that we should have. What would are we talking about a national front government? Are you talking about a coalition? I would be willing to be part of any discussion that explores. Hold on, let me finish.
Maybe the PPP should ask you to be their prime ministerial candidate.
What would be good? Hold on. What would be good for Guyana? What I would say is all the derogatory comments that I've heard the leader of the opposition left against me, I hardly think he would want to consider me as his prime ministerial candidate. And
no,
that's
but
the thing.
Maybe we can suggest to him. Would you be willing to take that offer?
But I don't think he would be asking it because I don't think that
if he were to ask, would you take it?
So let me tell you how I would answer that. There is that you must come to the table with a basis of mutual respect. And the things that I have heard him personally levy against me, I don't think that respect is there.
But Minister, you got into a coalition with the PNC.
There's no way we could work together based on that lack of respect. Now, what I want to say is what is more important, and your program is excellent for this. Let's have an intelligent discussion on race. Let us have an intelligent discussion on what form, more of the parties working together would take.
Well,
let's talk about whether it would be a national front, would it be a coalition with all parties? How would we ensure that Guyana gets the best? We need to have these conversations. And
I'm certainly going to take you up on that offer.
Yeah. And you know what?
But let me ask you this. Why aren't you the prime ministerial candidate for the AFC? What's the future? How many seats do you think you will win at the next election? Minister Ramjatan said he thinks about 12.
Yog, we have a process within the AFC, and we went through that process.
But isn't the Cummings-Berg Accord dead?
Hold on. No, it is not dead. You see, this is more misinformation that you have. The Cummings-Berg Accord is valid until 2020. The Cummings-Berg Accord has 36 months on it. And this is where, again, I'm saying there's a lot of misinformation.
If I were a betting man, Minister, if I were a betting man, I would bet you that you're not going to get the prime ministerial slot. The AFC wouldn't get the prime ministerial slot.
But Yog, you already seem to think that the Cummings-Berg Accord has expired.
I agree. I think it has.
It has not. Go and read the document. All of this is out here. It is out there in the public domain.
On the basis
until 2020.
Good. And on the basis that the elections coming up are not necessarily predicated upon a 5-year term, but predicated upon a contracted term because of the NCM, then the whole contract you have on the accord is moot.
Absolutely not. Oh, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. I would
I
like
hear.
to suggest, no, I would like to suggest, you, that you read the Cummingsburg Accord. Maybe I
I'm
can
going to
send
get
it
a
to you.
copy.
Go back and check it,
I
and you
will.
will see that it expires in 2020.
Yes.
We realize, and let me just say one more thing. You see, the thing about the Cummingsburg Accord, remember this was done prior to us getting into government.
Hmm.
And there were parts of the Cummingsburg Accord that actually contravened some sections of our Constitution. And we acknowledge that, and that is precisely why the AFC is willing to have a discussion with APNU on the Cummingsburg Accord. We could have taken the decision that, guess what, if we're going to an early election, then the terms of the accord remain the same. That is not our position. And that's the only reason. I would like to say to you that there's a lot of misinformation and hysteria.
I'll still be a pragmatist and tell you that I think that's a pipe dream. But answer my next question: How many votes?
We can agree to disagree.
How many seats at the next election you think the AFC will pull?
We are going to an election as a coalition, and therefore, what I would say to you, go back to when the AFC ran as an independent party, and we commanded 7 seats.
But you didn't in the LGE. It was a real bad performance.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. But less than 60% of the population of Guyana voted in local government elections, and local government elections is never an indication of on the same level as a national election. You know that. But again,
I hear you. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I hear you.
What I will say is that the possibility of a change of government after 23 years was only made a reality thanks to the AFC.
Well, I think
AFC continues to be the third force. And
not anymore. You're collated.
And what I want to say,
you yourself said you're in a partnership. You're in a marriage.
We are in a partnership, but we do play a role where we continue to be the balance. We continue to be the balance, not only in the coalition in terms of our approach, in terms of how we view things. We're the underdog. We have an opposition where the process of selecting a candidate is limited only to a few people. In our AFC, we had 130 delegates select our prime ministerial candidate. It wasn't a few.
But you had a rigging the other day at your conference, didn't you?
We did not have a rigging.
Anyway, we're out of time, Minister.
Let's have a serious discussion.
We're out of time, but what I can ask you to do, can we come back on another day to talk specifically about some of these areas?
Absolutely.
So that we can do this. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Minister, for being here. Keep up the good work. And Guyanese are looking out for good telecommunication and interconnection across the country.
Absolutely. And I promise that I will commit to ensuring that we do. And I just say, look at the amazing things. If people go to our website, I know we mentioned quite a bit of the things that we've been doing. We didn't get to talk about, our safe city and all the other things. But yeah, I'd love to come back.
We'll pick it up another day, and I'll leave you with this final word that the Guyanese as a whole had looked upon the AFC as that the one that would be negotiating for a better Guyana. We're going to pick the conversation exactly here the next time we come together. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much for having me.
And welcome. And before we close, let me say thanks to Devin, thanks to our technical operator, thanks to the Globespan team and to Nohar Singh for making this program possible. It's free of cost and it's all out of the pockets of the Globespan people. So some tax breaks are due there, Minister. Thank you also very much. Good night, everyone.
And just before we go, I would just like to announce the results of the poll. We asked our online audience, do you want liberalized telecom sector now? 100% said yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. I do too. I'm glad they're supporting me.
Thank you. So 100% of the respondents to our poll said that they want liberalization right now.
Absolutely. Who would
Thank
say
you.
no? Who would say no?
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Nohar. Thank you, Globespan team. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Yog. Take care.